And actually one of the big problems is we see architecture during urbanism, and it's not urbanism, it's actually big architecture. They are giant buildings, and they will be the burden of our children to actually manage these literally single buildings that are the size of entire cities and economies. And I think that is one thing that I found very sad about this wanting to be the biggest project or the biggest thing or the biggest investment, is that they're really unmanageable afterwards. And I think they're going to be a great kind of built infrastructure burden on the people that inherit them.
Hello, this is the second episode of Kentimi Bilirim, I Know My City, and we have here Alexis Şanal'ı, who is the co-founder of SANALarc'ın and the founder of Hey Imaginable Guidelines, and she's also an architect and city maker. First of all, thank you for accepting the invitation and for your time.
It's a pleasure to be here.
The program is actually about some questions that we want to ask about the cities and about architecture, and we actually will have the questions from a perspective of an architect. So today I'm not going to be an architect here, I'm going to be one of the public, and Alexis is going to be with us to answer these kind of questions. So let's go into the topic. I have a question personally. Why do people like the old cities, not the city that we are building today? Or is it even true, and why is the reason?
I think people love cities that celebrate our creative imagination, that support our kind of social lives, that provoke curiosity, and that are kind, and that are at a human scale. And I don't know if this is related to newness or oldness. I would say that the oldness is very attractive because the old cities have a lot more stories to tell. So they are these beautiful cultural narrators of where they've been and where they're going, where new cities don't quite have that depth of storytelling. But I don't think it's true that we prefer to visit new cities and old cities. I can think of Seattle, Vancouver, Hong Kong. These are all very new cities in the New World. Sydney, Australia is one of the great tourist destinations of the world. Mm-hmm. But cities like Dallas, cities like Abu Dhabi, these cities aren't as attractive because they have been designed to be technocratic, to be financial centers, and most importantly, to support cars. They are not there to be vibrant places for citizens to celebrate their social lives and their cultural expressions. And I think it's more those values that we seek than the actual newness or oldness. And that the forms of cities that respond to cars and technical problems tend to be very boring and uninspiring, and our imagination is not really engaged.
I kind of agree, but don't you feel that some cities, when you visit them, you feel like happier, and some other cities you kind of feel suffocated and you feel bored and so on? So do cities really affect the way that we feel?
I would say significantly, and I would say, again, this is not an old or new. I have been to many old cities that I felt very suffocated by because, they have allowed things like cars to enter them. So you're competing for the limited amount of street space, for example, and that's very aggressive and very uncomfortable. So I think cities that are filled, that, find pollution a tolerant part of the economic need to develop. I think cities that have prioritized sprawl and consumption have a lot more to do with that sense of either isolation in the latter, or the sense of being suffocated because you are constantly being, your senses are being violated from loud noise or exhausting smells, or even there's plenty of research that says that children, especially in the next generation, spend 80% of their time indoors because the outdoors environments are not feeling safe. And indoor air quality is much lower than fresh air. So I think cities that haven't invested in streets as ecologies and as public spaces, that don't make it easy for everyday citizens, that means everybody under 18 and over 40, to easily walk and access those amenities, are really failing their citizens to provide comfort and safety and wellness and health and comfort, yeah.
So mentioning urban spaces, how do you imagine a good urban setting, or what can we improve about cities?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really challenging because citizens are very different, visitors are very different, and at different ages we have very different expectations of our cities. When we are a child, we have one expectation of our city. When we're 25 and falling in love or defining our careers, we have a very different expectation of our city. And so how can the city be kind of a common ground for all of these aspirations? And I think one of the ways is really thinking about the fact that streets make up 40% of the land of a city, if not 35%, that our parks and green spaces invite lots of different creatures and species to live, including ourselves, and they celebrate the different seasons. So I think starting with those universal principles, everybody loves a sunset, everybody loves, when the flowers bloom, everybody loves kind of when it's cold and the sun comes out. I think, so I would start with some of those very fundamentals and then step back from there on the things that are more nuanced so that the city can host people's communities of interest, and not just their economic interest or their family's interest, but their hobbies. So if you're excited about biking, or you're excited about gaming, or you're excited about, book clubs, that there are spaces for all of these people to kind of find themselves in and shape to their needs. And so the city is always changing as well and responding, that it's not a fixed environment, that it is really... And then as those communities change and evolve, the city is also designing itself.
So, I got curious about one point, actually, going out from your last sentence. The city is changing, of course, and it might require new things coming up, in the future. So, planning the city from, top-down approach, do you think is the best way to design cities, or shall we leave a space for flexibility? Or how can you, as a city maker, approach your projects?
I think this is kind of one of the great existential questions of modernism. The city is the greatest collaboration of mankind. No single person can do it. Modernism tried to do that from a top-down system. And it did achieve many things. We have really amazing sewage systems and sanitary systems that we did not have before, that you do need that type of top-down planning for it. But I think that is also overvalued, and why we see this resentment towards the expert in city planning is because, in fact, a lot of the more immediate needs can be solved by the community. Or what I think is really interesting, Murat was highlighting today even to me, is the difference between the word Kent and Semt. It's also in that concept, Kent is designed top down, where Semt is designed bottom up. And that both of them have an intelligence and have to have a great deal of respect for what the other can achieve and kind of calibrate and work together. So I don't think it's one or the other, because I do think sometimes you do need some top-down systems to overcome major shifts in technology and human needs. I don't think you can do climate change without top-down systems and energy changes. And yet, at the same time, unless we change our micro behaviors and participate as citizens into the design of our spaces, we are also not going to achieve our goals.
So when we talk about cities, we always remember the concept of bigness. So some responsibles in the state or something, they say, we're going to build the biggest park, we're going to build the biggest blah blah blah. So do you think that big means quality naturally, or what do you think about this point?
I would say I think most of those are this very antiquated or dated ideas of globalism, and most of them are not. If we go see that biggest, 10 years later, it almost looks childish and silly. It's like, in addition, I think a lot of that bigness has to do with political power. Like we see the big avenues come in, even starting with Paris, or the big avenues that went through New York. And then we see that happening a lot in kind of large demolition projects going through for roads or highways. I'm not suggesting that we don't need roads or highways. I think that what we need is not the bigness, but the scale that is suitable for the time and place. And it shouldn't be just to show off and kind of wave your flag. And I think actually, I would say something different. I would say that one of the big failures, I believe, in architectural education and city design education is that planning went one way and architecture went another way, and city design got lost in what is now called landscape urbanism. And actually one of the big problems is we see architecture during urbanism, and it's not urbanism, it's actually big architecture. They are giant buildings, and they will be the burden of our children to actually manage these literally single buildings that are the size of entire cities and economies. And I think that is one thing that I found very sad about this wanting to be the biggest project or the biggest thing or the biggest investment, is that they're really unmanageable afterwards. And I think they're going to be a great kind of built infrastructure burden on the people that inherit them.
Mm-hmm. So let's move to Hey. Can you talk a bit about your project? How did it start? Why did you do it? And where is it going?
Yeah, I think in many ways it was my response to all of those questions. Like, how can we capture the collaboration of a city and actually celebrate the objective expertise of many professionals? So we crowdsourced all the knowledge in different topics, from stormwater and public advocacy to very ordinary things like crosswalks and sidewalks. And we actually put that parallel to the objective, the emotional intelligence of the city, looking at the work of artists practicing what their imagination of the city and their emotional connection or their emotional isolation or their exploration of the city, and trying to put these two in juxtaposition. The main idea is to empower everyday people and citizens with the fundamental base of knowledge to participate in the design of their cities, that each topic individually is well understood, but actually the complexity to build a city requires this kind of intricate weaving of all of these different topics, and the communication and the kind of micro recalibrations and adjustments. And if we have a command of this knowledge collectively and a collective imagination of what's possible, I believe we can start building cities that are more empathetic, and build new cities that are empathetic and kind of what we do find exciting about our older cities.
Thank you so much for your time and for having us, and see you in the next episode.